You've got a long list. Time starts now.
Yeah. So the Confederation of British Industry, Mark, viewers and listeners will have heard of them. They are a sort of bosses lobby group. They represent about 190,000 businesses. When they make some economic forecasts,
pay attention.
Governments pin back their ears, and they're basically testing the mood as well among their members. And what they're saying is here, I've got a graphic for GBNews viewers on television. So GDP growth, that's the size of the economy in the UK. It grew by 4.2% this year. That's what we think it's going to be. But by 2023, it's going to shrink to minus 0.4%, which is obviously a recession, as you say. Unemployment, that's going to go up from 3.6% now to 5% next year, which is still quite low by historic standards, but increasingly painful. Inflation, though, here's some good news. According to the CBI, down from 11.1% where it currently is this year to 6.5% next year. It's worth saying, though, Mark, so the CBI is saying that the economy will shrink next year. Only in June, so less than 6 months ago, it was saying that the economy would expand by 1% next year. And there's a sense that businesses are on go slow. There's a lot of supply chain issues from the lockdown that are still knocking around. The global economy hasn't really rebooted. And here's the thing. A lot of businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises and the bigger businesses, because of the political instability, because of all the change of government and so on, because of the uncertain business outlook as interest rates rise around the world, they're putting investment on hold. They're not making those investments. They're not building those new factories in the main. Of course, some are. And that's what's going to slow growth down so much that the economy actually contracts next year, according to the CBI.
And this is why they've used that phrase that we remember from the 1970s, stagflation, a stagnant economy, but inflation, that's the worst of both worlds. So the CBI, and I guess they've spoken to lots of their members out there, saying a year-long decline in consumer spending. So I guess even if inflation comes back a bit and interest rates come back a bit, the picture is going to be pretty grim for the whole of next year.
Well, things can change quite quickly, but that's certainly the prognosis now. For me, a lot of it depends on the war in Ukraine, what happens to oil prices, and we'll come on to them, Mark, because I just wanted to quickly tell you about a review that the government's launched this morning. Well, it was revealed over the weekend. It was officially launched this morning. Grant Shapps, business secretary, he says he doesn't want big businesses to be ripping off small businesses when it comes to late payment. The government estimates that small businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises up to 250 employees, they're owed about £23 billion in unpaid invoices. Now, this often happens when inflation goes up. If I'm a big business, you're a small business, I owe you £100, OK? I'm going to delay paying you if I'm unscrupulous, because by the time you get the £100 until it's going to be worth a lot less. And that is the issue. The trouble that Grant Shapps has got, though, is that one of the biggest entities that's guilty of late payment in the country is the government itself. It contracts with lots of businesses, so the government has to put its own house in order. But many people listening to this, whether you run a business off your kitchen table, whether you're on a regional business, SME business leaders, late payment is often the bane of their lives.
And cash flow means whether you stay
king,
afloat
whether you can survive or not. Absolutely.
Exactly. Now, the other aspect, and you wrote about this at the weekend in the Telegraph, is about oil prices and what happens in terms of the effect on the economy. We've seen a little bit of a fall at the forecourt, for instance, in recent weeks, but 159 some people are doing for unleaded, but starting to creep back up again today, just in time for Christmas.
Just in time for Christmas. Now, because the world economy is slowing, because interest rates are going up, particularly in the US, UK, Western Europe, that means less demand for oil around the world, which would mean ordinarily, Mark, oil prices would fall. And they have fallen from about $100 a barrel over the summer to around $80 a barrel until quite recently. But OPEC, the exporters cartel, plus, they call it OPEC plus now because OPEC working with Russia, the Saudis, a lot of the Middle Eastern economies, they're not pushing the Russians away because of the war in Ukraine. They're saying to the Western world, no, we quite like working with the Russians, actually. They are restricting supply. and that has that's led to prices not going down as much as they would, given that the world economy's falling. Now, what's happening now, and it's kicked in today, is that EU and indeed G7 Western world sanctions on Russian oil have now begun. And believe it or not, what we are trying to do is we're trying to cap the price at which Russia sells its oil around the world.
It's what, $60 a barrel?
$60 a barrel, which is much lower than where the market is, OK? How can we do that? Well, the EU and the UK in particular, between us, our companies control 90% of the insurance of freight around the world. You know, UK
Moving
shipping
it
insurance.
around the place, yeah.
And what we're saying, our companies, with the heavy hand of government on their shoulder, are saying, we're not going to let companies transport, we're not going to insure freight ships transporting Russian oil unless the Russians sell it back to us at $60 a barrel. So G7 leaders, Biden, Macron, Rishi Sunak, they want to keep Russian oil moving, to keep the world economy moving, but they want to try and control the price.
And penalise the Russians.
Now, of course, the Russians think this is outrageous. A lot of the OPEC countries think this is outrageous, a massive extension, potentially, of Western power. And that's why there are concerns in the market this morning that these sanctions could backfire and could lead to even more production restrictions by OPEC. And that's why we're seeing the oil price spike up about $2 or $3 this morning alone.
Up like a rocket, down like a feather.
Indeed.
There we are. As ever, thank you for that. And we'll see what happens in that market, of course, in the coming days.